mean, my family is very much academic and business and lawyers and things like that. I have an older sister who is 4 years older than me, and she saw a child playing piano at a birthday party and just really wanted to do it. So my parents, after some convincing, organized piano lessons for her when she was about 5 to 6, which meant that I was about 1 to 2 years old. And now my sister is very conscientious, and also I come from a household of, I suppose, a mentality: you can do anything you like, but do it properly. So it meant that when she started, she did start practicing daily, not many hours, not with any type of career aspirations, but she practiced daily. And I remember always being in the other room, hearing her practice. So I'd usually be in the living room with the nanny, or playing games. And usually my mom would be practicing with my sister in the other room. And I remember there was like also some exclusivity surrounding that, Dana's practicing, so you be in the other room and, play, and you can't see her at the moment because she's practicing. So I remember that basically my earliest wish was, well, I want to do that too. I also want to be in that room and practice and play the piano. And my parents were quite, I would say, I mean, they were a bit skeptical of the idea of raising two children that did the same thing, that both did music and both played the same instrument even. So they did put some effort in the beginning to try to steer me in an alternative direction. I remember they tried to get me like to play tennis and to go like to tennis lessons, and that really just didn't. I just really didn't like that. And then they at least tried to maybe another instrument, and I went to like these type of fairs where you can try out all the different instruments, but I just really was focused on the piano. I think probably, if I think back, much because I just idolized my sister so much. So it was more like trying to imitate what she did than, any rational thought behind it. And I do remember that people always told me, you have an artistic personality. Even when I was very young, I was very extroverted and loud and verbose. Not that has changed a lot since. So, I felt an affinity with this, I suppose, image of musicianship and artistry, kind of. And so when I was 4, I finally, was allowed to start having piano lessons as well. And that was how it began. So my as I said, I did not go to like a classical symphonic concert, actually, not in a while. I mean, I was young when I went to the first one because I started playing young, and then of course my parents, they tried to expose me to like, orchestras and symphonies and things like that. But it happened after they realized just how much my sister and I enjoyed playing the piano. So it was more a reaction to nurture that, rather than first we went to all these concerts and then we decided to maybe start playing an instrument. So it was a bit the other way around.
So how old were you? Were you like 5, or when does a piano start?
I started when I was 4. So I mean, piano music school, like a music school in the city I grew up in. I grew up in Düsseldorf, which is another big city in Germany, close to Cologne. And I think my mom had researched good music schools, and there was this really good, she was Ukrainian piano teacher that I would say maybe was a tiny bit more discipline focused and conscientious compared to maybe other music schools that I know now. Like, I know of young people going to. Like, she had a bit of a more strategic approach to it. Like, we were learning scales. We were like, there was a strategy that surrounded it. It also meant that we had a sense of achievement quite early on, and there was, which I believe is very, I know, I think ties into the question that you were going to ask as well, because I got the questions from Christina as well. Yes. So I believe was very important. We had regular concerts, we had regular mock exam type things, and of course at a very, very basic level, but that meant that you felt improvement, you felt a sense of achievement, and you could really try it out very, very early on whether you liked this whole concept, also whether you could, I suppose, handle the pressure that came with it.
Mhm.
I mean, as a 4 or 5 year old, these music school concerts were daunting and important and everything, and then you did it, and you were extremely nervous, and you played, and then but then I realized that this entire package of, yes, the nerves and the pressure, then the playing, ideally the sense of achievement, the applause, the attention that came with it, was something that I just really loved
Mhm.
from the start. So yeah, those were kind of the beginnings. And I was with this teacher for almost 3 to 4 years. And then I would say the decisive shift, and that I would say is like, it was many things kind of happened much more ideally than anyone could have, I suppose, planned for. But my sister ended up, who's by the way also a pianist to this day, so we
Right,
both
right.
still play. My sister ended up doing this master class with a like big name in, I would say, especially German piano teachers. His name was Karl-Heinz Kämmerling. I mean, I think he was internationally quite renowned, but especially in Europe, he was a big deal. And he was also known for the fact that despite being a huge deal, he also at least taught young people, not necessarily regularly, but he in masterclass, he would accept young people, which was unlike other professors of his level. And I think my mom had researched that he was like, someone to play. And it was because my sister was at a point where she was either going to go quite serious dancing, ballet, or she was, maybe going to try out the piano thing. And I think my parents wanted some type of orientation. Shall we pursue this, or is it completely pointless? Because it is like a one in a few thousand type of situation. So she organized, so she found this masterclass. We went to this masterclass, and it was only my sister who was supposed to play and was supposed for him and do that masterclass. And I was just there because, my parents were divorced at the times already, and what to do with me. So I went as well. And I was 7, my sister was 11, and she properly did it. She auditioned, she got in, to the master class. She started playing for this Karl-Heinz Kämmerling. And then I happened to sit next to him at lunch at like the lunch cafeteria area.
Mhm.
And it's quite a funny story if I think to it back now, because I'm not sure if I would have ever dared to do now what I did then as a 7-year-old. Because of course I'd been told that he was this, respect him and call him professor this and this, and, be very, very careful, because I was known to, sometimes not particularly be careful about, with what I said. But he sat next to me, and he was struggling, like opening the food that we were given, that was like in a kind of plain type food packaging. So I like struck up a conversation with him and was like, there's a much easier way to open this. You should use your knife and fork, and then and he was like looking at me, this at that point 72-year-old man, like being spoken to by this like little, and he was like, okay, yeah, and what do you do? And I said, well, I'm also a pianist. I said at that point, he was like, oh, are you good? And I'm like, yeah, I'm really good. And he's like, oh, you should play for me then. And I was like, okay, then I'll play, sure. And I went to my mom, who of course got completely nervous, and she was like, what did you do? But then I ended up playing for him that evening, a little Clementi sonatina, I think. I mean, I was 7. Very basic pieces. And that was it. And then 1 week later, the masterclass was over. My sister finished the masterclass, and then he called my mom and said, I'd be ready to teach your daughters if that is something that you would, consider, for free, I should add. And he taught in Hanover, which is a city about 2.5 hours to 3 hours away from where we lived. And it was kind of this, our parents, my mom and my dad, came to us and said, do you want to do this? And my sister and I were like, absolutely, we want to do this. Kind of naively at that point, of course, but because from that point, what it meant was that every weekend we'd travel to Hanover for lessons. And then during the week, we'd go to normal, first primary school and then high school in Düsseldorf. So, of course, that immediately puts a level of commitment to it that, of course, was quite intense. And I would say that was also quite rare then for the age, because then from that point on, our entire lives were really organized around getting lessons from him, which was every weekend. And then during the holidays, he always taught master classes all around Europe. So we would go to the master classes. So this then really solidified, at least I would say, a very high level of potential that we would pursue it professionally. And then we ended up staying with him until he died 10 years later. So he then, yeah. And so I'd say that was like the really defining moment of also, also getting into a circle of people that were at the core of the music industry in Germany. Mm-hmm. Whether it was the students he taught or the university he taught at, or the other professors that taught at the university, the concerts that we played as part of his class, the competitions he sent us to, the prizes we subsequently won in the right competitions. I mean, that was then the starting point for it to really blossom.
So he was both a mentor and a connector for you. He connected you to.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and I say the mentor part was extremely important to me. I mean, I had two really incredible teachers in my life, and I consider myself extremely lucky, and I'm so grateful. One was Karl-Heinz Kämmerling, who taught me for 10 years and, part raised me, I suppose, in a way. Right. And then the second one was, wait, sorry, you asked something? You said?
No, go ahead.
All right. And was Lars Vogt, who, of course, I'm replacing in this tour. And he was also a student of Kämmerling's, actually, a far older student of Kämmerling's, who by the time I started learning from him was not a regular student anymore, but would come for lessons still every now and again. And when Kämmerling died, was in the process of dying, he had cancer, and it was like also quite a long process of us knowing that he was nearing towards the end. He asked Lars whether he could take over a select number of his students. And Lars had not taught before. He did not have a position. And I'm not sure if he would have actually pursued having a position had it not been for that. But Lars, of course, said yes. And then I learned, and then he became my next teacher for the next 10 years until last September. So, and he was just as important to me in, of course, very different ways. I was a bit older already, at a different point in my I would say journey of learning, and he taught me like a realm of possibility of music making that just completely flabbergasted me in the beginning, because Kämmerling was really a teacher. He never actually performed himself, which is uncommon for teachers nowadays. He was a teacher, a professor through and through, not a performer. I remember he would tell me when he was young and he finished his studies, he said, I had to make a choice. Either I would be practicing 8 hours a day, investing in my skills and trying to pursue that, or I'd invest 8 hours a day in teaching others to develop their skills. And he instinctively felt an affinity to teaching and started teaching. So that was really, and he taught incredibly. I mean, in terms of technical skills, the description of how to create sound, just the strategy involved in building a technique from literally the ground up. I mean, at 7, I barely had any technique to speak of, and the opening up to different sectors of repertoire, starting, Mozart, Beethoven, like the first Schumann, the first Brahms, the first Impressionism, like the first Russian composer, like really, like he was so knowledgeable in how to, I would say, let an artistic personality open up individually, but still, getting influences from all the important sectors. And then Lars was much, much more a performer rather than a teacher. I mean, he taught at the end of his life a few people, and magnificently, but he lived performing music. I mean, he was a pianist and then also a conductor. And his approach to music making was really from the aspect of connecting with an audience, of having something to say, of risking on stage rather than playing for safety, of pushing the limits of sound abilities. Like, I remember he would tell me at some point something like, yeah, like it's better you try to create the most incredible moment of timing or pianissimo, and maybe not be together with, let's just say, the violinist that you're playing with, rather than making sure you're together 100% and creating some generalistic moment or something like that. So, which to me was like, what do you mean? Should I not try to be together with him, like, at all costs? And like I said, it was a completely different approach, but just, I mean, incredibly inspiring. And a lot of it was also just watching him play in the lessons and seeing what he was able to do just on the fly in terms of using the pedal and just the way he used the voicing, and that was just, it was just a completely different thing, and equally as important and inspiring.
As motivators, what sorts of things did you think you were especially good at bringing the best out of you?
I mean, Kemerling was, I would say, much more stereotypically authoritative in a way. I mean, he was, I think, like a typical authority professor. I think many people, I had the privilege, because I knew him so young, to have a kind of like grandfatherly relationship with him. So, but nevertheless, there was also an aspect of respect, and fear is the wrong word, but when respect is so strong that like there is a real desire to not disappoint, I would say. There was definitely that atmosphere there. So what Kemerling would do in all his master classes, and also throughout giving lessons, he had class concerts. Now, as far as I know, I don't know how it is in the States, but in Germany, most professors have class concerts maybe once a month, maybe once a week, but usually it's more of a once a month thing. In his master classes, it was every evening. Wow. And every evening it was performance practice. Performance practice is what he called it, basically. And everyone that did the masterclass sat there. It was, you know, between 2 to like sometimes 5 hours. And most evenings you would play. And it was, and usually you would know if you would play or not, and what you would play. And sometimes, I mean, you would, especially at the age of like 10 or 11, when I was in the midst of it, my repertoire consisted of, let's say, 2 to 3 pieces, which meant that I would play usually the piece I was working on 7 days in a row each evening. And of course that did, on the one hand, just really solidify the piece, but on the other hand, it just completely normalized, is a bit of a, you know, encouraging word, but it definitely made it more normal to be in this performing situation. Mm-hmm. And so that, and it was incredibly nerve-wracking. I mean, these performance practices were much more nerve-wracking than most concerts I've ever played. I mean, because it was like he was sitting there, he was extremely honest, you know. It was like, if it wasn't your best work, and it wasn't your best work, and he would say that. And if it was a really good day, he would also say that. But, you know, it was very honest. And it was just a very high pressure situation. And if you do that so many times, that of course gives you a type of base foundational confidence in your ability to handle stage situations in a way that is very, very, well, it's something that you can rely upon, that is important. Not that it's still not a challenge, but at least you have that foundation, which is priceless. And then Lars was much more like the on your side type of, you know, teacher at all times. I think it was because he was a performer and he was so intimately familiar with the pressure of performing. So if he saw that, you know, you maybe, you know, you were trying, but you were struggling with the place because you were maybe nervous that day, or maybe you had other repertoire to practice the day before, he had complete understanding for all of that. So he was, I mean, he just really, I think he inspired with the level of his love for music making and for art, and for, you know, it was just, he lived it, he breathed it. And when you were with him, I mean, that's the thing that really motivated you, that spark just completely was yeah, it was infectious. I mean, you were like, yeah, this is it. So I'd say that was more Lasse's type of motivation. Like Kemerling was more the paternal, you know, typically male, authoritative, like I reward you when you do a good job, but when you don't do a good job, then, you know, you better work better next time, type of thing. And last was more like, it's just a privilege to be in this space.
Sharing the love with you of
Yeah,
music
yeah.
art making. And do you have
Mm.
a chance to give master classes yourself ever, or you ever
I
worked with
teach
players?
I teach sometimes, very, very, very rarely, and only upon request. And I taught also when I was a bit younger, um, people that wanted to learn Kemmerling's practice technique and could not get a lesson with him. I sometimes taught for him, or not for him, not like as an assistant, but like I taught his you know, technical strategic practice methods. And then I have given master classes in the recent years. Some I enjoy it. I mean, because I had such great teachers, I'm aware of the potential that a great teacher, of the impact that you can have on a student's life, not just as a you know, teacher long term, but even just with one inspiring lesson. So I have a huge amount of respect for it. So I teach sometimes upon request, and when I do, I do enjoy it, and I enjoy seeing the you know, like the light bulb go on when like you give someone a perspective that you remember how, you know, how much of a change it was for you, and it's nice to pass that perspective on. But it's not something that I pursue, you know, strongly enough to say that I have any, you know, proper breadth of experience in.
Mm-hmm. Well, the reason I asked that question is I wonder, with all the experience that you have, having been a student, whether that pre-adapts you to be also a good mentor. Probably, guessing it probably does.
I mean, I definitely, I mean, just passing on the knowledge that was passed on to me is valuable already, just because I know how valuable that knowledge is. I mean, I do have this kind of voice of Kemaling in my mind, this like, you know, it is its own commitment. Like, to be really an impactful teacher, there is an element of consistency that is just very important and beneficial. To really see someone and help someone grow, there is like a huge benefit to being able to do it weekly, or at least very regularly. And at the moment, I'm not at a place where I could give someone lessons weekly, because I travel too much for that. So there is like this thing of you know, to do it at the level that I was privileged enough to receive it, it would take a time commitment that at the moment has not yet manifested in my life.
Maybe sometime way down in the future. Um, you talked about doing competitions a bit ago, and I just wondered what you thought about competitions. I know that in Europe, young pianists do a lot of them, so do young violinists. They're not as common in the US, for instance. Did you find them to be fun, or a good challenge?
I mean, I did many, I did youth competitions much more than I did the big adult competitions. And to be perfect, so I don't want to completely, I would say, criticize the whole concept of like the adult competitions, because I never really entered properly into that. I've always been very, very, very skeptical of competitions. If it comes like competitions as a symbol of competence, is what I'm saying. Not the process of going to competitions and challenging yourself, but undoubtedly the moment you go, there is hope attached to being validated that, you know, you were good. And then when that doesn't happen, of course you can tell yourself, yeah, but it was just a challenge. But it's very difficult to have that, I would say, emotional control to separate yourself completely from that wish. And I think part of my skepticism came because Kemaling was a very, very influential figure in the competition sphere. Now, of course, I was so young, I didn't go to these big competitions at the time, but many of the students did go to these big competitions. And I would sometimes be in the room when the phone calls came that in a way, negotiated prize winning, so so I would see, not necessarily that it was completely divorced from ability, because that's not true, but how other elements definitely played an equally important role. And that it kind of, so still, I mean, I think that incredible people have won competitions and started careers off of it. I do think it's kind of a career path of the past, not necessarily a career path that works the same way nowadays as it did maybe 50 years ago, partly just due to the sheer number of big competitions that exist. And I mean, you've got one winner here, and then the next competition, the next edition comes out, and you've got the next winner. The much more, I would say, broad and different types of ways to build a career that at the moment just seem to be much more efficient, or work much better than the competition way. And then, as I said, also the fact that I also think that this era of like professor gurus that controlled arguably this entire field are kind of, it's not that much a thing that exists nowadays anymore at the same rate. And with that, I think the like incredible authority of competitions has also a tiny bit, has diminished a bit. I think that it is, if you are looking for like a goal, a challenge to really enhance your skills with, I think that going to competition can be a huge motivator. And I've seen many colleagues do that, not, as I said, because they had aspirations to win, but because they had aspirations to, really learn that repertoire to the best of their abilities. And that is a very good way to do it. For me, I've always, I mean, the other thing that is always just really, I would say, gone against what, or has kind of inhibited me from going down that path is, I really think that music and judgment, or art and judgment, supposed objective judgment, I should say, is kind of antithetical to me. I think that art absolutely should be judged subjectively, and not that there is no such thing as like objective, hierarchies of quality, but this idea of going and playing a Beethoven sonata and someone saying that was better and that was worse, to me is a bit like, okay, why? And then the only authority that I give 100% credence to is the text. If someone doesn't do what's written in the text and someone does do what's written in the text, to me, there is an objective marker. But if, someone decides to interpret the text this way, or interpret the text differently, or, play it softly, or, or much more. But these are things where I'm like, this is so taste, it's much more taste, and it's much more someone really convey something important. And in the end, you kind of end up judging things like perfection, was the etude really without mistakes? Was this, and you end up judging, because these are the objective markers that are actually not that important for an incredibly moving performance. So that's, I have like kind of, I don't know whether that is, the best factory to get the best musicians out of. But nevertheless, I do see the value in, as a young person, setting these goals and kind of really challenging yourself to new levels of ability through that. I do see that, absolutely.